What's the good word, Jets fans? It's your boy DKB here. We are diving into our first general manager candidate breakdown, and I was able to dig enough stuff up to give you guys an individual review of each of these candidates. So hopefully you guys enjoy it. If you have anything else to add, as always, please feel free to drop it in the comments. And starting after the next candidate breakdown we'll do, and including for the head coach series as well, I'll probably start showing like a quick ranking list or something like that on one of the sides, and you guys can let me know, where it seems like I'm falling off track with it. But this general manager review was very entertaining, and I don't think it'll be specific to just this guy, and he's kind of unique in his own right amongst the general populace of candidates we can have here. But looking at general managers as opposed to reviewing head coaches and what you're looking for and stuff is very intriguing to me, right? It's a different skill set, a different expertise you have to have, and overall a different level of comfortability, right? You can go from being potentially a position coach that is highly regarded, and maybe you make a wild leap to a head coach position or the normal standard leap to an OC. But any of those kind of variations can take less than 2 or 3 years, whereas with these GM candidates, you're talking about guys that have put in 5, 10, 15 plus years, in many cases working their way up through whatever side of the front office branches that they're going through. So nonetheless, let's get into our first guy here. Ray Agnew, the Lions assistant general manager. And by the way, this is a list that I pulled from Albert Breer of Sports Illustrated. He dropped a number of names in terms of guys to look out for very early in the year, January of this year. So that's where I'm really quoting at least these names from. But Ray Agnew, 56 years old. One thing we have to consider here is a lot of these guys are going to be 50 plus, right? Probably closer to maybe mid 40s. So Agnew, I would say, is probably a little bit older than a lot of the other guys that we may come across here. But he has the uniqueness of being one of the few front office personnel members that has a background as a player in the NFL. Former top 10 pick as a defensive tackle for the New England Patriots. And he has a Bill Belichick connection as that being his head coach for the first 5 years of his career. Ends up moving to the Giants, finishes his career out with the Rams, where he was able to help them achieve a Super Bowl. So you love that component. You love that aspect of a guy who's a top draft pick and knows the pressures of what expectations can be as a former top 10 guy. And then, of course, working your way into being able to achieve a Super Bowl is a huge deal that not many can say that they've been able to achieve, especially being a significant component of a team or a roster that's built for that, right? So you love that aspect, right? The winning background and atmosphere is there, which I think is where everything starts at. Now, when you take a look at his mentors, right, who he's kind of been groomed by, who he's gotten to see in that lead chair, making a lot of these crucial decisions and how he's governing an entire organization. He's come up under Les Snead, the Rams general manager, during his tenure there. And then Brad Holmes, who was able to lure him over to the Lions 4 years or so ago when they were making additional additions to the personnel in the front office, right? Brad Holmes being the executive vice president and the general manager for the Detroit Lions. So you take a look at how did he work his way up, right? One of the big things that I came across is that he focused a lot on the pro personnel side. So think free agency and what it looks like, really being able to break down some of these guys that have been picked up by other teams, how they've been able to develop or progress over their career, and trying to help identify some of those gems. So I also think about waiver wire success and things like that. He's had a number of roles, but he's really come up and groomed himself through his scouting side, and that was something that enthralled us and endeared us to Joe Douglas. And I do think it is one of the most critical pieces, right? When you think of general manager, you don't necessarily care as much about the contract stuff or even about free agency so much as having successful draft classes. And this is a guy that everybody that I've seen that's quoted him in one fashion or another has said he has an absolute eye for NFL talent. So that is something I'm loving. Some of the roles he's had, right? You're talking about 18 plus years of experience, starting out with the Rams when he got finished playing his actual NFL career. He ended up working his way up the front office ranks with the Rams. Team pastor, a spiritual mentor for them. Then he became a director, and this is in not necessarily chronological order, but just kind of how I recorded the notes, by the way. Director of player development for the Rams as well. Helped a lot of players deal with things like life issues as well. An assistant pro scouting director also for the Rams. And he ended up owning things like draft preparation and trade preparation, right? Both in season and then, of course, if they want to move up, if they want to move down, any offers they get that they want to consider within the NFL draft in and of itself. And then he became a pro scouting director for the Rams, which covered things like free agency. And one of the more intriguing pieces, and I don't know if this applies to a lot of players or a lot of people that just work their way up the ranks in this particular facet, but opponent scouting report breakdowns, being able to look at the schedule, see what each team is doing, and being able to help contribute to the coaching staff about how they can best their opponent. So I really find a lot of these different elements of what he's done intriguing to me, right? This isn't just a guy that's going to sit in his chair, drill, cut off all the lights in the room, turn on the film, and lock in with his scouting department. This is a guy that's going to be out there on the field, letting his, top draft picks and really his entire draft class know what to expect in an NFL, be able to connect personally, be able to offer some tips and advice, even though the game has changed tremendously since when he was drafted, how best to approach this thing, especially considering he's been around some elite players in his own right that he's had a personal hand in bringing in, or he's been able to assist in developing as part of a lot of these rosters that he's constructed. So right now, Ray Agnew, I can see why he was number one on the list, but honestly, this is a resume that if you look at it, it pops. And then, of course, he spent his last 4 years being with the Lions as their assistant general manager, helping out Brad Holmes and really just doing everything that he's done prior to being with the Rams. And then, of course, adding more of a vocal point in the draft room in and of itself, and there's some things to hit on for sure. Now, there's from a comparison standpoint, I don't know if I would have this with everybody, but again, digging into some stuff with him, many people have compared him to Ozzie Newsome, not just in terms of thick players or people that would have influenced him, but from his actual ability to identify talent, and not only that, but get ahead of some of the trends. And what I mean by that is this was a player, gotta keep differentiating. This is a person that didn't have much of a say-so, if any, right, in terms of being with the Rams and what the draft was going to look like and stuff. Obviously, he contributed to a lot of the scouting reports, reviews of the players, and really helping stack the board and stuff like that. But this wasn't a guy that his yes or no was going to, really determine anything in most situations. But he was specifically credited for standing on the table, and as a guy that's a little bit more of an introvert from my understanding, pounding the table and actually becoming vocal for the Rams to draft Aaron Donald when they did. And much like the rest of the league, and I believe Aaron Donald was a 13th overall pick, many people didn't doubt the talent. They doubted the archetype, right, the typecast, in that Aaron Donald was a smaller, skinnier guy at the defensive tackle position. And they've had other players that have had success, but it wasn't something you look at and say, okay, this can be an obvious hit. And he was able to kind of get ahead of that trend, quote some previous guys that he's seen had strong success. And that is something that you tuck away and consider. He could be a guy that can, find a Legion of Boom, type of situation to take advantage of, or he can find an Aaron Donald or anything amongst the likes, right? When you think of some of those outlier teams that were built, and whether that was from a philosophical standpoint, a data standpoint, physical aspects they were looking at. And I bring up the Legion of Boom because I'm thinking of the 6 foot or 6'2" plus guys with the ridiculous arms, wingspan, stuff like that. So outside of that Ozzie Newsome comparison, which is elite, right? Don't forget Ozzie Newsome, Ravens great, and he was one of his last big moves that he made for the Ravens was getting them Lamar Jackson, which was a guy everybody seemed like they wanted to turn into a wide receiver or a running back or something along those lines based on the athleticism. So again, something that I would love to be able to see happen for the New York Jets. Some of the other things is he's coming from obviously a football family, just a lot of people that are ingrained in football. He actually has his son, Ray the Third, who's a pro scout for us, the New York Jets, and then his son, Keenan Agnew, also is a scouting assistant, I believe, as of this year with the Tennessee Titans. So connections amongst the league, things that he can tap into, right? This is also something you want to strongly consider with this GMs, and something to kind of give us a little bit of foresight, right? When you think about teams that we may be more apt to trade with, or teams that we may look to, pick apart when it comes to free agency classes that we may obtain and stuff like that. There's been moves that he's influenced that I think, based on recent history for the New York Jets, would be something that we would greatly applaud. Right now, for all of the losing seasons that we've had, we have been able to hit on guys that have been near the top of their positions, or have at least been worthy of the picks where we selected them at. And I'm thinking of guys like Jamal Adams. I'm obviously thinking of our 2022 draft class with Sauce and Jermaine, and now you're looking at Will McDonald, right? But you're also looking at Breece Hall, guys like Demario Davis that kind of got away from us. But ultimately what I'm getting to here is that he was a heavy influence on the early contracts that were delivered to guys like Jared Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Penei Sewell, and they're still looking even deeper into the roster, right? Guys that may not necessarily be stars, but critical core pieces. When you think about a lot of these guys that we let go before, or guys that we have put ourselves in bad cap situations for, to where we can't extend them, and we're looking externally, and instead of paying let's say instead of paying a Garrett Wilson, right, we go out and we end up balling out on a contract for an Alan Lazard, or we end up balling out for a contract for a Devontae Adams, who's now in the building, for example. That would be something that generally will frustrate most of the fan base. When we see and we know a hit, there's usually not much delineation in those that agree and those that disagree there. So this would be one of those moves that I would say, when it clicks, when it's obvious, when you have the rest of the league also highlighting this, is something that you have to jump on. And we've talked about this so many times, where the earlier you give a contract to a guy that you feel supremely confident in, the more money is going to save you, because these contracts only escalate, right? It was only a couple years ago where you were seeing guys get $70, $80 million contracts, and now you're getting these crazy, Justin Jefferson, $120+ million contracts, guys that are getting 100, M's guaranteed, and it's only going to continue, right? It's going to rise from here. It's very rare that you see, a backwards trend where you see a step back in guys resetting the market in certain situations. So that is also something that's really appealing to me. Also, just taking a look at which positions they decided to hit on. Obviously, all of these guys were star-studded, with maybe the arguable exception being Jared Goff, but they hit all the key pieces on the offensive side of the ball: the quarterback, the wide receiver, and then the blindside protector, right? So he's a guy that obviously understands the importance of the roster construction and which guys you want to pick to also build around. I take a look at some of the moves from, draft class and things as well with him. One of the things of note was the undrafted free agent classes, right? For the New York Jets specifically, us as fans, I think we enjoy these maybe more often than the rest of the league just because of how behind the eight ball we've been when it's come to hitting on draft classes. And so the undrafted free agent class is really a way for us to subsidize. We've also been really good about being able to find some undrafted free agent gems, right? And whether that's just for a short time or guys that kind of tend to blossom into something more like a Damian Harrison Snacks, which was, one of my all-time favorites. But they invested heavily in a guy, wide receiver Isaiah Williams. I think they gave him like $225K guaranteed. Either way, the highest amount for their pool. And you've seen guys like Brad Holmes and Ray Agnew step up and say that guarantee doesn't mean anything in terms of being able to make the roster, right? They bred an environment of competition where even if they're investing heavily in you, if you're not up to par, they're willing to get rid of you. And I understand we're talking about a UDFA versus potentially, draft picks here, but it's important just from our perspective because we haven't seen that. If we've dropped any kind of significant money that, the media takes note of, it tends to buy those guys a lot more leeway than maybe necessary, right? You've also seen them pick up and be able to add, again, Detroit, this Lions team, they have a Super Bowl caliber roster. So the fact that they were recently able to get 3 undrafted free agents to make the team, that looked way more impressive than the multiple. I think we had 4 or 5, right, with a lot of them coming on defense for our team. Not as impressive for a team that's struggling to even get 3 wins here. They were able to get a wide receiver, a safety, and a long snapper to all to join the team by the time everything was said and done. So I applaud that as well. Seems like he can kind of pick out some stuff via every avenue. Obviously, free agency kind of being his bread and butter with being able to create strong free agent classes, but then being able to also have success in the draft and then being able to hit the secondary piece of the draft, I would say, with the UDFA pool, huge plus. One of the things that stood out to me as well, I seen a quote from him a while back that was mentioning he has a preference, and this is from the lens of the draft once again. He has a preference on viewing tape of candidates when they're in times of turmoil, right? Maybe a bad season that didn't go the way it was expected. Whatever the case is, some kind of bad light is either on the player or the team, and he wants to see how they perform during those times, right? Because if you're only a star when things are looking positive, when things are going great, that's one thing. If you're still out there and you're that main offense producer, right, or you're that main catalyst on defense that can help try to keep your team, in games or anything along those lines, that I think speaks more volumes to anybody than anything else, right? And I think about, all of the different various sports movies in the back of my head, Remember the Titans and all of those different kind of things where you've seen these guys that stepped up when the worst of the worst was happening. So it makes me feel like he can foster and impact a team that maybe is lacking in leadership and what that potentially looks like. He can just continue to stockpile those guys, right? And at some point that has to click, right? It's kind of like starting a fire from scratch. If you're out there in survival mode, at one point the flint is going to help something catch on fire. You would imagine, as long as you're keeping things dry. So there's a lot to love with Ray Agnew, in my opinion, if you haven't caught on. One of the final things, last few bits to note here, he was part of the coaching front office accelerator program. That was recently initiated in 2023. That basically is a program for leadership development sessions with football operations experts and facilitators. It also gives them time with club owners. So I don't know what the overlap would have been here in terms of any guys that entered this program and necessarily being involved with Woody Johnson or Chris Johnson, for example, and what it looks like. But the things to note here is Ray Agnew seemingly has plus remarks in all of the key categories that matters. He's bringing the necessary amount of experience with 18 plus years. He's bringing the pro football background with him. He's bringing the connections. I'm assuming he could piece together an extremely well-groomed scouting staff. So hopefully we don't have a step back bringing a guy like Agnew in. He's also well respected, and he has Super Bowls to his name, right? As well as Hall of Fame player guys that he's been able to bring into, the building where he's been at, and some guys that look like they also can be perennial All-Pro players and stuff with the Lions. So overall, very, very impressive resume. Outward looking in, I wouldn't know how to call this, right? I'll just rank this to the best of my knowledge and what I think sounds like a good GM candidate. You guys help me along with this, but there doesn't really seem to be a downside for this, right? And again, all of these guys we're going to look at are probably going to be assistant GMs or something, laterally, from a position title, right? I don't know what else would be the equivalent to being like an assistant GM, but somewhere in that region, right? So there shouldn't be something that somebody else is necessarily bringing in huge abundance that another guy wouldn't necessarily bring, but we'll find out as we get more and more into this with some of the guys that we continue to cover here. But I love it. The mentors that he's had, the experience, the multifaceted ability that he covers. This feels like if you were to kind of bring some of those head coach, what am I trying to say? If you want to bring some of those head coach like titles into the GM role, Agnew feels like he would be more of a CEO style guy, right? Somebody that can have success at every level. Instrumental in which also is a huge factor, right? Don't forget the Lions, and I'm not saying this is all specific to Agnew doing whatever he did, but the Lions were a crap heap, right? A 3-13-1 record team, I believe, the year before Brad Holmes and Ray Agnew ended up getting there. They turned this thing around, right? You're talking about in the span of 3 to 4 years. You're now talking about Super Bowl, whereas how many times have we hit the reset button in 3 or 4 years, right? He's also done this by not just going out and heavily buying, whoever best he can get, or having to mortgage the future in the draft either. Jared Goff was a extremely savvy pickup. Amon St. Brown, great draft addition. Penei Sewell, great draft addition. I even love some of the moves that they made, a year ago and stuff. Taking a linebacker, I can't remember the name off the top of my head, Jack something, I think. But taking a linebacker that maybe not necessarily a unicorn, but a little bit more of a throwback version for exactly what Brad Holmes would have wanted, and that team to develop, instant success, continuing to develop from his rookie season. So there's a lot to love. And he's a guy that I feel like would be able to also identify a great offensive or defensive mind when it comes to also help building out the coaching staff, which we can't forget. So ultimately, all in all, hopefully I can shorten some of these future ones up, but let me know what you guys think about Ray Agnew, and I'll catch you again. Peace.